Imagine that you wake up in England near the end of the 14th century, and someone tells you that the royal capital is now your responsibility. In front of you is one of the busiest urban economies in the kingdom. Merchants are bringing wool, wine, cloth, fish, spices, timber, metal, grain, and fuel through gates, streets, wharves, and markets. Shops face the main commercial roads. Warehouses sit close to the river. Westminster contains the machinery of royal government. It sounds like the easiest fortune imaginable. Surely you can collect rent, charge traders, receive customs, and watch silver pile up. Then the accounts arrive. The palace needs repairs. Carpenters and masons need wages. Fuel has to be bought. Horses need feed. Clerks need salaries. Bridges, streets, wharves, and public buildings consume money. Imported goods cost far more than local staples. And there is one more surprise. The king does not simply own every house, shop, stall, and street. So the real question is not, how rich is the capital? It is, which parts of this enormous economy actually pay you, which parts belong to other people or institutions, and how much does it cost to keep the royal center functioning? To answer that, we need to be precise about what royal capital means. By the 14th century, Westminster had become the center of English royal administration. The Exchequer, the office that handled government finance, was established there, and the Chancery had its headquarters in Westminster Hall by 1310. London, immediately beside Westminster, was the kingdom's dominant commercial city, but the City of London was not the king's private real estate portfolio. It had charters, civic officers, courts, property owners, religious landlords, guild interests, and institutions that controlled their own income. The crown could receive customs, rents from particular royal properties, payments connected with royal rights, and extraordinary grants, but it could not simply take the rent from every shop in Cheapside. That distinction is the key to the entire story. A medieval capital was less like owning one giant property and more like sitting at the center of a network of rights, taxes, rents, services, and obligations. Before we spend a single penny, we need to understand the money. In medieval England, 12 pence made 1 shilling, and 20 shillings made 1 pound. That means 1 pound contained 240 pence. A mark, a common accounting unit, was 13 shillings and 4 pence, or 160 pence. And here is a detail that can confuse a modern American audience. In the late 14th century, there was no everyday silver shilling coin that matched the accounting shilling. People calculated in pounds, shillings, and pence, while actual payments could be made with silver pennies, halfpennies, farthings, groats worth 4 pence, and larger gold coins. So when an account says that something cost 5 shillings, think of that as 60 pence of value, not necessarily 5 physical shilling coins. Let's establish wages first, because every later price will make more sense. Records and historical wage series show that pay varied by skill, place, season, employer, and year. London could pay more than many other parts of England. For the 1390s, surviving evidence commonly places a laborer around 3¼ pence per day. A carpenter could earn about 4¼ pence per day. A thatcher could also receive around 4¼ pence. A mason at the upper end of skill-building work could receive about 6 pence per day, and one annual figure for a mason is about 8 pounds. These are not universal national paychecks. They are documented historical examples and useful benchmarks. Now, we'll move up the salary ladder. A senior officer in the royal household could receive around 20 pounds per year. The king's physician could receive 40 pounds per year. 40 pounds is 9,600 pence. At a daily wage of 3¼ pence, a laborer would need nearly 2,950 paid working days to equal that nominal amount. The comparison is imperfect because annual officers could receive food, lodging, clothing, fees, or other benefits depending on office, but it tells you how steep the income hierarchy could be. A single pound was not pocket change. It represented 240 pence, or roughly 74 days of wages for a laborer earning 3¼ pence per day. Now you can walk into the food market with some sense of what the numbers mean. In the 1390s, ordinary ale could cost roughly 3/4 of a penny to 1 penny per gallon. For a laborer earning 3¼ pence, one day's cash wage could therefore buy about 3 to 4 gallons at those recorded prices before paying for anything else. Bordeaux wine could be around 3 to 4 pence per gallon. 1 gallon could absorb almost an entire day of a laborer's wage. Better or more specialized wines could cost much more. Evidence from the reign of Richard II gives examples of Rhenish wine at about 8 pence per gallon, red wine at about 6 pence, wine from Crete or Provence around 12 pence, Malmsey around 16 pence, and Vernage around 24 pence. At 24 pence, a gallon represents more than 7 days of labor at 3¼ pence per day. The capital's luxury market was operating on a completely different level from its basic drink market. Food shows the same range. In account evidence from the 1390s, a chicken could cost about 2 pence. A side of bacon could be around 15 pence. A fresh cod could reach about 20 pence. 100 apples could cost about 7 pence. A recorded batch of 425 eggs cost 33 pence, which works out to a little under 1 penny per dozen. Sugar was a luxury. A pound of loaf sugar could cost about 18 pence. For our laborer, that 1 pound of sugar represented more than 5½ days of wages. A chicken at 2 pence was well under 1 day's wage. A fresh cod at 20 pence represented a little over 6 days. This is why simply saying food was cheap or food was expensive is meaningless. It depended on what food, what quality, what season, and whose income you're comparing it with. Now imagine feeding not one person, but an entire royal household moving through the capital. The scale becomes enormous. One late 14th century household account records 10 sides of bacon bought for 12 shillings and 6 pence. That is 150 pence total, or 15 pence per side, matching the individual price evidence closely. Another purchase records 40 sheep for 72 shillings, or 864 pence total, averaging 21.6 pence each. A London confectioner's bill in 1390 came to £4, 16 shillings, and 8 pence. That single bill equaled 1,160 pence, more than 350 days of labor at 3¼ pence per day. Another order of almonds, rice, ginger, pepper, cinnamon, sugar products, honey, saffron, mace, cloves, cumin, and other imported ingredients came to £10, 6 shillings, and 7 pence. That is 2,479 pence. Luxury food was not a small add-on. It could be a serious budget category. Now let's talk about where royal money could actually come from. The port was one of the most important places to look. The crown's ancient customs, established in the 13th century and continuing through the 14th, charged 6 shillings and 8 pence on every sack of exported wool. 6 shillings and 8 pence is 80 pence. The same rate applied to a specified quantity of wool fells. A last of leather, a large commercial unit, paid 13 shillings and 4 pence, or 160 pence. Foreign merchants faced additional customs. Under the new custom, they could pay an extra 50% on top of the ancient wool and leather duties, and an ad valorem charge of 3 pence per pound on many other goods. 3 pence on a pound of value is 1¼ %. Pause on the wool charge. 80 pence of ancient custom on 1 sack of wool is almost 25 days of a laborer's wage at 3¼ pence per day. And that was before the additional subsidies that governments sometimes imposed on top of the ancient custom. In parts of the 14th century, those extra wool charges could be much larger than the base duty. The exact subsidy changed over time, which is why it would be misleading to give one rate for the entire century. The important point is that the port did not generate royal income because the king owned the merchants. It generated income because the crown had legally defined customs rights on particular flows of trade. But now we reach the most important correction to the fantasy of easy ownership. A great deal of urban income was civic, institutional, or private. London Bridge is a perfect example. The Bridge House estate collected rents and tolls to support the bridge. Surviving accounts begin in 1381 and record rents for market property, tolls from carts and vessels, and payments for maintenance. Historians note that the bridge wardens handled sums around £750 per year in the late 14th century. £750 is 180,000 pence. That sounds enormous, but it was not a royal profit stream that could simply be transferred into the king's personal spending. It belonged to an infrastructure system with its own revenues and expenses. The property market tells the same story. In the earlier 14th century, a small shop on a prime London street could rent for about £3 to £4 per year. £3 is 720 pence. £4 is 960 pence. At a laborer's late century wage benchmark of 3.25 pence per day, those nominal amounts equal roughly 222 to 295 days of wages. A tiny stall inside a covered market known as a seld could be far cheaper, with annual rents recorded from about 6 pence to 2 shillings. 2 shillings is 24 pence. Location was everything. A few feet of frontage on a major commercial street could be worth many times the cost of a modest stall hidden inside a market complex. And shopkeepers spent money to attract attention. In 1385 to 1386, the owner of one London seld spent 8 shillings and 4 pence to make, paint, and hang a sign on the cheapside frontage. 8 shillings and 4 pence is 100 pence. That sign alone represented more than 30 days of a laborer's wage at 3.25 pence per day. Prime retail space was not primitive in the economic sense. Merchants understood visibility, traffic, presentation, storage, and location value very well. If you actually controlled a rental property, the gross rent still would not equal profit. Buildings required timber, tiles, lime, stone, ironwork, glass, labor, and periodic reconstruction. Westminster's own building accounts show how quickly those costs could grow. In a major program of work in the 1320s, one set of palace repairs included £16 and 17 shillings for timber, boards, laths, and related work. Ragstone for the same group of repairs cost 22 shillings and 6 pence. Ironwork cost £8, 7 shillings, and 2 pence. Glass cost about 45 shillings and 11 pence. Plaster of Paris together with wood used in preparing it cost 38 shillings and 8 pence. Tiles and lime cost a little over £9 and 6 shillings. Wages for masons, carpenters, smiths, and other workers in that portion of the account came to more than £39. And that was only part of the work. For the palace chapel, timber cost more than £17. Stone from several sources cost roughly £144, 15 shillings, and 7 pence. Lime cost about £9, 7 shillings, and 10 pence. Iron and steel cost about £8, 7 shillings, and 8 pence. Coal cost 34 shillings. Reeds used to protect materials cost 2 shillings and 6 pence. Transporting materials cost more than £33. Wages for workers came to roughly £330. The lesson is dramatic. The building itself may symbolize wealth, but maintaining monumental architecture converts wealth into a continuous stream of payments. Fuel is another quiet expense that never goes away. Long-run English price series place firewood in the 1390s at an average of roughly 4 shillings and 4 pence per ton. Coal averaged about 1 shilling and 7 pence per ton. Tallow candles averaged close to 1.8 pence per pound, while wax candles averaged around 3.4 pence per pound. Wax light could therefore cost nearly twice as much per pound as tallow. A pound of wax candles at about 3.4 pence was roughly 1 day of a laborer's wages. A ton of firewood at a little over 52 pence represented about 16 days of that wage. Heating and lighting a large complex was not one spectacular bill. It was a repeated operating cost. Then there are horses. Earlier 14th century estate accounts show just how valuable working animals could be. On the Peterborough Abbey estates, cart horses bought on regional markets averaged about 25 shillings and 1 penny, with the most expensive example in that series reaching 46 shillings and 8 pence. 25 shillings and 1 penny is 301 pence. 46 shillings and 8 pence is 560 pence. Using our later laborer benchmark simply as a scale comparison, the The lower figure equals about 93 days of wages, and the higher figure about 172 days. Buying the horse is only the beginning. A royal account covering 1330 to 1331 recorded expenses of £783, 3 shillings, and 8.5 pence for a group of up to 112 royal horses. More than £524 of that total went directly to feed, including hay, oats, bran, grass, straw, and horse bread. The feed bill alone was more than 2/3 of the recorded total. That is exactly the kind of expense that disappears from the fantasy version of medieval wealth. A stable is an asset only if you can keep paying to operate it. Transportation adds another layer to almost every urban price. Stone in a quarry is not the same economic product as stone delivered to Westminster. Timber at its source is not timber stacked beside a building site. Grain in the countryside is not grain ready for sale inside the capital. The Westminster Chapel account makes the point beautifully because it separates material purchases from more than £33 spent on conveying materials. That transport charge was large enough to equal thousands of pence before a mason even touched the stone. Now consider clothing. A furred gown in 1390's account evidence could cost about 5 shillings and 4 pence. That is 64 pence. For a carpenter earning 4.25 pence per day, the gown represented about 15 days of wages. For a laborer at 3.25 pence, it represented almost 20 days. Fine cloth could be much more expensive. A late medieval bargaining dialogue built on an earlier language guide gives an asking price of 4 shillings per ell for cloth, with a buyer arguing for 3 shillings and the seller demanding 5. An ell was a cloth measure of roughly 45 inches in England. Even the 3-shilling offer was 36 pence, more than 11 labor days at 3.25 pence per day. High-quality textiles were portable stores of value as well as clothing. So what makes the capital economically powerful from the crown's point of view? Density. A large city puts transactions close together. Merchants need storage. Retailers need frontage. Imported wine arrives through control points. Export can be measured and taxed. Royal officers can buy supplies from a deep market. Credit is easier to find where wealthy merchants operate. Skilled masons, carpenters, metalworkers, painters, and clerks can be hired in one region. The crown benefits from access even when it does not own the underlying business. That access, however, can make the royal household a very expensive customer. Look again at luxury groceries. In 1390, a single confectioner's account of £4, 16 shillings, and 8 pence included ginger, quince preserve, pine nut conserve, caraway, preserved cloves, sugar products, nutmeg, wax, and paper. Another order at £10, 6 shillings, and 7 pence included more than 500 pounds of almonds, 112 pounds of rice, 14 pounds each of ginger, pepper, and cinnamon, plus sugar, honey, saffron, mace, cloves, cumin, and other goods. These are not hypothetical menu prices. They come from elite household accounting. A capital gives you access to global goods, but global goods can drain silver quickly. London Bridge gives us a rare chance to see that system as something close to an operating institution. Its surviving late 14th century accounts record rents from the stocks market and tolls from carts and ships, then lists spending week by week. The bridge wardens handled around £750 in a year in the late 14th century. Do not read that as £750 of profit. The word handled is crucial. Receipts flowed in because payments also had to flow out. Medieval accounting often lets us see money moving through an institution without giving us a modern corporate income statement. Let's build one final comparison using only documented prices and clearly labeled arithmetic. Our benchmark labor earns about 3.25 pence per day in the 1390s. An ordinary gallon of ale at 1 penny costs about 31% of that daily wage. A chicken at 2 pence costs about 62%. A gallon of Bordeaux wine at 4 pence costs about 1.25 workdays. A side of bacon at 15 pence costs about 4.5 workdays. A pound of sugar at 18 pence costs about 5.5 workdays. A fresh cod at 20 pence costs a little over 6 workdays. A furred gown at 64 pence costs almost 20 workdays. A Cheapside sign at 100 pence costs more than 30 workdays. An earlier century cart horse at 301 pence costs the equivalent of about 93 of those later workdays. A £4 annual shop rent is 960 pence, nearly 295 workdays at that wage benchmark. Now compare those numbers with upper-level salaries. A £20 royal household salary equals 4,800 pence. A £40 physician's salary equals 9,600 pence. At 1 penny per gallon, £20 could theoretically equal 4,800 gallons of ordinary ale, if nothing else had to be purchased. At 18 pence per pound, £40 equals the price of about 533 pounds of loaf sugar. These are not realistic shopping plans. They are purchasing power comparisons that show the enormous spread between everyday goods, skilled labor, elite salaries, and luxury consumption. And now compare all of that with building work. The chapel stone bill of roughly £144, 15 shillings, and 7 pence was larger than 7 annual salaries of £20. The worker wage bill of roughly £330 was more than 16 such salaries. The late 14th century London Bridge institution, handling around £750 in a year, was operating on a scale far above the income of an individual craftsman. Once you move from household shopping to urban infrastructure, the unit of analysis changes completely. So, are you rich if the royal capital is yours? Yes and no. And that answer is more interesting than a fantasy number. You sit beside the largest concentration of commerce, credit, skilled labor, imported goods, administrative offices, and taxable transactions in England. The Crown can draw major revenue from customs, such as 6 shillings and 8 pence on a sack of wool, 13 shillings and 4 pence on a last of leather, and additional charges defined for foreign merchants and particular goods. Royal property can produce rent. Royal offices can collect established dues. The capital gives the government access to markets on a scale few other places can match. But the city is not one asset, and its gross economic activity is not your personal revenue. A prime shop's rent may belong to a private or institutional landlord. Bridge tolls may support the bridge. Civic revenues may stay within civic administration. Guilds and merchants control their own businesses. Meanwhile, the Crown pays for buildings, officers, specialists, fuel, horses, transport, food, cloth, lighting, and administration. A palace that looks priceless can also generate bills of hundreds of pounds. A stable full of valuable horses can require hundreds of pounds in feed. A luxury household can spend several pounds on one specialized food order. Monumental government is expensive because almost every visible symbol of authority has an invisible operating cost. That is the real economy of a medieval royal capital. It is not a treasure chest waiting to be opened. It is a dense machine for moving goods, labor, information, rent, taxes, and services. The most valuable thing the ruler controls is not every building. It is a set of legal rights and institutions positioned beside an extraordinary concentration of economic activity. The money coming in can be impressive, but so can the money going out. If you woke up expecting effortless wealth, the first day might still feel wonderful. The markets are busy. Customs are being collected. Rents are due. Merchants are arriving. The palace dominates the royal district. Then the clerk opens the ledger. 6 pence for a skilled day here. For pounds of annual rent there. 8 shillings and 4 pence for a commercial sign. More than £33 to move building materials. More than £144 for chapel stone. Hundreds of pounds in wages. Hundreds more passing through bridge accounts. 3 or 4 pence for a gallon of imported Bordeaux wine. 18 pence for a pound of sugar, and 20 pence for a fresh cod. Every street that looks prosperous is connected to somebody's claim, somebody's rent, somebody's wage, and somebody's bill. And that is the twist. The medieval royal capital is enormously valuable, but not because one ruler owns every coin inside it. Its value comes from concentration. People, trade, offices, property, skills, transport, credit, and legal rights packed into one economic center. The Crown's challenge is to capture enough legitimate revenue from that system to support government without pretending the whole city is private property. Once you see the numbers, the capital stops looking like a pile of silver and starts looking like something much more familiar. A vast organization with valuable assets, powerful revenue streams, expensive infrastructure, a large payroll, and a constant need to keep the accounts balanced.